Today we're dealing with Saturn to the angles, and this is where things really start to come alive and you start to see how to direct someone in their life, how to direct someone responsibly. So what we've seen up till now, we did Saturn to itself, where you could see what happens at the various ages you are, just for the time or the age you are, and what generally everybody goes through. But there's still differentiations, like puberty starts at different ages for different people, but it more or less, the turning point comes around that Saturn opposition Saturn in the midlife crises, and just you have all the different phases that come on just as you go through the specific stages of your life. Just you don't have to know someone's chart to do that. Just have to know someone's age, or more or less their age they're going through. Oh, they're in this phase. Oh, they're in their menopausal phase, or they're in their Saturn return phase, or you can get certain things coming up just from Saturn to it, just from the age someone is. So this is really useful when it comes to guiding someone, because everyone's going against that background of Saturn. Then we did Saturn to the Sun, the Moon, the Mercury, but then Saturn to the Sun, next most important, because it's when you define your goals, when you set your goals, or when they're set for you. And the Saturn opposition, when you're really opposite at the furthest point from your goals, and then having to struggle to spend 15 years to get back to define them again. So this Saturn cycle to the Sun, to your confidence and your purpose in life, to when you're really deciding things, or when you really feel hemmed in or limited by things, this is the Saturn to the Sun. And that, you don't even have to have the chart, just need to know somebody's birth date to get that. So even if you don't have someone's time of birth, you have a lot of information to go for just by seeing the regular Saturn to Saturn cycle, the 7-8 year cycles or phases, and the Saturn, when Saturn, the age Saturn conjuncts the Sun and opposes the Sun, and the squares too, but you really see the conjunction and the opposition very clearly. So you can see how to advise them without even having the birth chart, just knowing those two things, just to start from. This is how I like to work. I like to work from simplest information to next, so know someone's birthday. Okay, you got the Saturn to the Sun, and you got other planets to the Sun too, but you got the Saturn to the Sun, the main anchor. And then then you get the Saturn to the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. They're extra add-ons. They're extra pressure points to come on. They're not as clearly directional as Saturn is to the Sun and Saturn to Saturn. Okay, but once you know someone's birth date and place of birth, you can get the Saturn to Moon, Mercury, Venus. They're add-ons, okay? But once you get the person's time of birth, you get the angles of the chart, you get the houses and the angles of the chart, you get really information that's sensitive to a couple of minutes of time. And where 3 or 4 minutes can make a difference of 3 or 4 months in what terms of when something happens. Or a month or two anyway. So this is where you start to see the differences. Like if someone knows their time within an hour, wow, that's still going to give you half a sign. It's going to still be a spectrum of a year and a half between when a Saturn conjuncts one of the points on the angles. So there's a wide spectrum, a year and a half to work through to see when is the critical times, or when you have. So getting the calculations done and getting the actual facts, the actual dates, instead of the age someone is, you're getting it down to the year and the month that things are happening, as you're anchoring it to nature, to history, to time, to everyone else on a common basis. So that's our technical prep work. Then we have to start getting a person's history. I always get a small history, 5 or 10 major events in someone's life before I do their chart. So I have this to work with, but we're working with our own. So we're working with our Excel spreadsheet, I hope you are, and steadily building up your history, because this history will be so useful at every stage of astrology. Even 20 years from now, you go back and check things and you're instantly looking and you got it back and it stays with you. So this is really recapturing your history. So the Excel spreadsheet for the months and years of your life, that's important to keep work. Every time you think something, add it onto it. You just keep adding things on until you got it filled in. Teachers, places you lived, where you worked, friends you had, friends you lost, different, just health, illness, to period. So many things you could add into all these things. But okay, We're looking at the main turning points. When we get to the angles, we're really getting personalized information, really sensitive information. So just knowing someone's age, Saturn to Saturn, it's like you're walking down the street, you see a friend from across the street, and you sort of see their general meaning. You know who it is, you wave to them, you say hi, and you walk on, you see them across the street. That's Saturn to Saturn. Saturn to the Sun, you're walking on the same side of the street, you walk past, you say, hey, how you doing? You say hello, you shake hands, or you give a hug or something, and they say you, and you move on. You've had a more personal encounter, Saturn conjunct the Sun. Or the other planets in that matter, but the other personal planets. But then when you get Saturn to the angles, it's as if you meet the person, you take them in, you go to bed with them, and you really get intimate. 3 different levels of sensitivity. So 3 different levels of intimacy, 3 different levels of understanding, or 3 different levels of crises, 3 different stages. So these different dimensions, they're always going on at the same time. So we got to learn this, we got to watch them separately, and then they'll begin to come together on their own. But when you get to the angles, this is the point where working with your transits begins to click in. I would say probably 85% of the advice I would give to a client is based on Saturn to the Saturn, Saturn to the Sun, Saturn to the angles, and everything else is helping the other aspects align and make sense against the background of the Saturn transits. So it's a big statement. This will come clearer later. Yeah, so we're gonna, when you start your calculations, you're gonna have there's 4 different graphs. It depends which angle your Saturn hits first. So if Saturn hits your ascendant first, that means if your natal Saturn is in the 10th, 11th, or 12th house, it's going to hit the ascendant first. And you'd use this graph. And then if it's in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd house, it's going to hit the IC first. And you have this, you use this graph. And then if it's the descendant, it's in the 4th, 5th, or 6th house, it's going to hit the descendant. Natally, it's going to hit the descendant first. And if it's in the 7th, 8th, or 9th house natally, the Saturn, it will hit the midheaven first. So these are the 4 graphs to start with, just so that you have the same ages going down the page, more or less. Okay, so I'm just assuming you got the calculations down, and we'll come back to this, but the main part of today, so Saturn over here, oh, whoops. Over here, there we go. Come on. There we go. Okay, here we go. Now, this is our main, this is the angles of our chart. Now I have them written in a square here, but when we're doing the calculation to the angles, we're just doing the conjunctions to the ascendant and the oppositions to the ascendant. Conjunction and the opposition is the conjunction to the descendant. The conjunction to the midheaven and the opposition to the midheaven, which is the conjunction to the IC. These are the 4 turning points. We're not watching the squares. That's an extra factor, but that's a stress factor. But these are the turning points of your destiny. These are the crisis points in your life. These, when something hits the angles, it sets off a crisis. See, when there's an exact aspect, conjunction, square, opposition, there's going to be a crisis of some sort. In crises, what's the definition of crises? Opportunities for growth. No, it's just, there's pressure, it's raining out or it's snowing out or whatever. It's still up to you whether you go out or not, or whether you do something with it or not. So there's points of decision, or points when really critical times build up, and these are when Saturn crosses the angles, or any planet for that matter, but when Saturn crosses the angles, then you have a phase. Once it crosses the angle, there's going to be a 7-year phase that's developing. And each phase, so if someone's not dealing with the reality and they're just spacing out or whatever, and you're coming to see you, sometimes you'll accentuate the crises to wake them up to say, oh my goodness, this is really going on. Oh, to really hit the nerve of waking them to be aware of their life. And then once you hit the crises and they realize it, you can then begin to explain where you're coming from this phase and going to that phase. In fact, if someone knows they're in a crisis, and they're right there, and they're not sure what to do, you explain the phase that they're just coming from and the phase that they're going into. And if you do it properly, it's just like breathing in and out. You can almost bypass the crises, or you minimize the crises by stressing the phases. And the phases go a bit more into the background when you see the crises, but the crises are only understandable relative to the phases. So this is the mechanics. It's a really simple, interesting, fascinating process, but it really gives you the anchor on how, when you try to relate this to people, it relates. When you see this in your life, when you see it out of you, this is the fabric of knowing that your time is okay when you're aligned, when you find it aligning to these times. Now, sometimes when you're dealing with Saturn, because Saturn brings restrictions and depressions and frustrations, which are challenges for growth to make a better effort, make a bigger commitment, sometimes we'll block out some memories, or sometimes it takes a little while to remember what happens. But when you got a bit of distance from it, you can usually see the things happen and then kind of remember your attitude or your space, what's going on at those times. So the first cycle, when we look at the natal chart, we have the first category where Saturn was rising. So, or the rising half of the chart, from the IC to the ascendant to the midheaven. So in the day, the planets in the natal chart are moving from the IC, from the third house to the second to the first to the 12th to the 11th to the 10th. They're moving clockwise, but the transits are moving counterclockwise. They're moving from the 10th to the 11th to the 12th, moving the other way around. So it's a funny thing. It's just like that. So Saturn, when the transits move around, they're moving around in the order of the zodiac, but in the houses, the planets move through the houses the other way around. It's called diurnal houses. We'll get to that at some point, but level 8. But